It's going to start in a minute.
Oh, yeah, I see it. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay, so thanks for reminding me to turn on the recorder. Yes, we had already started talking about modern psychology picking up a lot of stuff from the teachings of the Buddha,
Yeah.
and that one of the things that you're mentioning now is that um, one of the new things that they're picking up is about this present moment. Kitty, we have somebody coming. Yeah. So that's an important point because, as I was about to talk about, that psychology grew up in a Christianized or Catholicized uh, culture, the whole culture coming out of the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, into the Age of Enlightenment. In fact, the entire Age of Enlightenment or the scientific revolution
Yes.
was done in response of trying to throw off the power that the Catholic Church had
Mm-hmm.
without trying to destroy too much of the doctrine of the church. That it was
Mm-hmm.
not a fight against that Christianity is bad. It was just a reaction against the power of the church.
Yes.
And so, in that regard, the old doctrines have remained the same, and those doctrines are very clearly spelled out with this idea of original sin. And in some of the scripture, it says, like in Romans, it says that who are you to be good? Only God is good.
Yeah. And you need to take hold of God in order to be good enough.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
So what has happened in psychology is that the psychologist has come in and standing now in the position of the God that's going to help the client. And it
Yes.
still remains this one up, one down
Oh,
system.
yeah. The hierarchy. Yes.
The
For sure.
hierarchy that's built into it, and that the psychologists don't really understand that they have been heavily influenced by this idea that uh, things that people are kind of broken, um, and that psychology, as best they could do, is to either lock them up or medicate them or something like this.
Yes.
But they're still doing it from the position of being an authority.
Yes.
So, um, oh, Robert's being is joining. Good to see you, Robert.
Hi, Robert.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Sorry I'm late. I've got
No
a few
problem.
No,
jobs I had
never
to do.
mind. We were just discussing the issues of how the Western culture that was part and parcel of the Christianity centuries ago still has major influence upon psychology and psychotherapy and whatnot like that, in the sense of the kind of delusion or illusion that once a person grows up and becomes an adult, they are
Mm-hmm.
kind of fixed. They're set or they're fixed in their ways. It's like maturity comes on, and that maturity then is a fixation so that the person can't change anymore after that. That's fairly well, that's not an actual definite statement of psychology, but many psychologists hold that kind of position that because you're human, you cannot become superhuman. That you're broken.
Yes. Yes. The whole obsession with the knowable self, the idea that there is an objective reality that people have to be a certain way in order for them to be completely human or self-actualized. It's kind of falling apart. The more people, the more the scientific community is looking at multiple reality, subjective reality, multiple
Mhm.
possible selves. Like you may have heard about Erik Erikson.
Oh, I
um,
know all about him, and you just mentioned, oh, what was his name with the hierarchy? Uh,
Maslow.
Maxwell, right? Okay, so yes,
Yeah.
I know these guys.
Yes. So Erickson's theory was really the starting point for this postmodern scientific perspective into the self. And his theory highlights the idea that depending on how people make choices in their life, they can develop into different selves. So it gives back some of that control and autonomy to people in their life in deciding what their self is going to be, rather than assuming that people are predisposed to be a certain way throughout their life.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's the new part, you see, and that you could actually sum it up into just one word. And the word is change. Instead of trying to medicate or alleviate the suffering that has now been set in place over time, the new idea in psychology is no, that too can be changed.
Yes.
And that's remarkable. In fact, that's one of the things that I would say that I could pick up in the new stuff that John Kabat-Zinn was talking about. That's part of the change that I see that even he has made.
Right.
Is this point about, can we in fact make big changes in our life? The answer absolutely is yes, we can. That's what the spiritual path has always been about.
Right. Yes.
That in fact, in many ways, Catholicism and Christianity stifles the spiritual path, and that you can also see that capitalism definitely suppresses the spiritual path, because capitalism wants to let us say take advantage of as many people as they can. They don't want a third of the population to go off and be happy. They want people. This is what I call the GREB, GREB. Big government, big religion, big education, and big business all are in the business of keeping people unhappy.
Yes, and convincing them that material things are going to make them happy, and just keeping them.
That's the allure. That's the bait and switch. And since the bait and switch has been in operation for so many centuries, we begin to say the bait's suspicious because you always make a switch.
Yeah.
And the switch is to go back and make things the way that they were, even though we have promised that things are going to get better. And so that promise of having things better is never fulfilled. And so, in a way, psychology for 100 years had bought into that you can't make things better. You can only make things a little easier for the ill.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now that was the medical model 500 years ago.
Yeah. And this is so true, because people and this idea that things can be made better is still there in general population. I see this idea, this faulty assumption that therapy is somehow going to make them immune to certain conditions. It's like almost like defending their cognitive domain, like depression is not allowed in my brain anymore if I go into therapy. But that's not the case. What happens is basically you learn to be okay with the fact that depression can come, and that comes with the development of skills and learning ways to manage this kind of disturbances like anxiety and depression. So once people realize that they have those strategies and those skills to combat against these conditions, they can just stop worrying about depression or anxiety coming into their life. They can.
What you're saying is, in fact, both true, and the way that the psychologists are looking at it, and they're missing a key ingredient.
Oh, tell me.
Yes, the key ingredient is known by all musicians. It's called repetition. That all of music is based upon repetition. Like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, da 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 da, is the entire piece of music. The entire first movement of the Fifth Symphony is just 4 notes repeated over and over and over again. Da 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 da. And it just keeps going on and on and on like that. That's the repetition. And that's the kind of repetition that the psychologists do not give to the client because the psychologists themselves have not gone through that repeating process of
Yeah.
continuously coming out of unwholesome into wholesome. Continuously remember to come out of the unwholesome and bring wholesome thoughts in over and over and over again until we begin to more naturally have wholesome thoughts. There's many ways to express this. One
Yes.
is imagine that there is a sidewalk and that there are weeds growing out of the cracks in the sidewalk. Now, pulling up the whole sidewalk is just too much work. That's
Yeah.
just you don't do that. The city wouldn't like you to tear up the whole sidewalk just to remove a weed. But you
Yeah.
can't get the roots of the weed out of the sidewalk without pulling up the sidewalk.
Yeah.
But there is another technique. The Buddha's method is that when you see that weed pop up to the surface, you whack it off.
Yeah. Instead of worrying about taking the sidewalk apart, right?
And so you don't have to take the sidewalk apart and you don't have to put up with the weed. Just when it pops up, you just cut it off. Soon, its roots will wither and die because it doesn't have any nourishment. We're not nourishing the weeds. Okay, there's another way. If you want to kill a tree, a lot of people say, well, the easiest way to kill a tree is by chopping it down. Or maybe, but if you chop a tree down, that may not kill it, because some of them will just put up another shoot. Okay, so you got to pull it up by the roots. In fact, that's the story about the tree, the Bodhi tree, was dug up so totally destroyed because they were afraid if they left any roots that the Bodhi tree would come back. What they failed to understand was that it already had a cutting taken to Sri Lanka. They brought another cutting back, and there's the Bodhi tree.
Yeah. Can't get rid of it.
Okay, so this whole idea of whacking the thing off, and so you can take the analogy of the tree and say, all I have to do is pick the leaves. If I can get up into the tree and pick up all the leaves, and every time it gets a new leaf, I can pick that leaf, that tree's going to die.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eventually.
Now, think about it. Wait a minute. Why are you killing trees? Those are wholesome trees. And the answer to that, well, we can think of that as just an analogy and recognize that we can, in fact, use that analogy to say that I don't have to kill every thought or make a big change. I don't have to stop my depressions. I just have to recognize that I'm giving myself a depressive thought now and then come out of that depressive thought. You probably already know and are well aware of, but a lot of people are not, that actually depression and anxiety are basically the same thing.
Yes.
They manifest themselves a little differently.
Trauma. Yeah. Absolutely. And this, what you said about pulling out the roots and repetition, this features in classical psychoanalytic therapy. So the idea is to go back to the roots, like childhood trauma, and investigate it and do it in repetition to get that thing out. But what psychologists are now realizing is that even in going back to the roots and taking it out, attempting to taking it out, you are actually reinforcing and making that whole trauma into something solid. You are reminding the individual that that had happened and that is something to be aware of.
Precisely. There is a term for that. We call it psychological archaeology.
Okay.
Have you heard that term? Psychological archaeology is when the therapist and the client goes digging back in the past, looking for first causes or original sin and that kind of stuff. And I have a little joke about that.
Tell me.
Little Tommy was in therapy, and he was a really angry chap.
Okay.
And so after a few sessions of therapy, they started doing some psychological archaeology and came to the time of recognizing that he got a spanking when he was 4 years old. And he and his therapist decided that it was because he got that spanking is why he's so angry his whole life. And they failed to dig a little bit deeper to recognize he got a spanking because he was angry all the time.
There you go, the vicious cycle.
Right, so much for psychological archaeology, because we're never going to get to the root cause of it, but we can also recognize that it's not a root we're looking for. It's the fact that things are layered and layered and layered and layered and layered and layered over and over again with repetition. that once
Yeah.
a child makes a bad decision about how
Hmm.
to feel, it's really hard for that child to change that behavior. And so they continue to reinforce it and reinforce it and reinforce it.
Yes.
And
Habit.
many examples of that. One of them would be if a child begins to think that there's bears in his closet, he will be pestered by bears in his closet even into adulthood.
Yes. A different kind of fear, maybe it'll be manifested in a different form, but the root
Right,
cause
right.
is the
The,
same.
the, the, the bear morphs, but the fear doesn't.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So that whole idea then about psychological archaeology, that was based upon that premise of original sin and all of that. But in fact, I was very much deeply involved in developmental psychology. That was,
Oh,
if I
wow.
had a specialty, that was it.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
You must be familiar with Piaget's cognitive developmental theory then.
probably not, because I was doing this back in the night. I mean, this was 50 years ago, back in the
Okay.
1970s. And so a lot of the stuff that you're studying now would be done by the students of the people that I knew about.
Yeah,
Sorry
yeah.
about that. I'm just an old man now, so my
No
psychology is really old. I've been keeping up, but not to the level. I mean, sure, Maslow and Erickson were around in my time,
problem. Mm-hmm.
and I was
Yeah,
there with Bandler and Grinder when they started NLP. But I
right.
only recently found out that they had split up.
Ah,
If those two guys split up doing their NLP, so much for NLP that even the founders can't be friends.
do go again. Yes.
So this new form of psychotherapy that has come out of the Buddha's teaching has to
Mhm.
do with working with the present moment.
Yes, absolutely.
But the present moment means that we look at the kind of thoughts that we have to see, is this old stuff or is this new?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, what we can say is that if we have a lot of new experiences that are wholesome, that will kind of cover up, uh, uh, sort of like a landfill. This year's garbage covers up last year's garbage.
Yeah, yeah.
But if
And
we
that
could
what you
cover
said,
up the landfill with good dirt, we can have a golf course or housing or all kinds of things on it if we start putting some wholesome stuff on top of all of the garbage. But
yeah.
the old way was is that no, we got to go dig in the garbage.
Yes,
We
very
got to go
much.
do psychological archaeology, and the Buddhist method is no, man, we don't have to worry about the past. In fact, we got to get out of the past almost as, with every thought, to
Yeah.
not do it from past ways, and let's make some choices. Let's look at what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
deal with
Yeah.
things in the present moment. And I'm really, really just overjoyed to see that psychotherapy is going in that direction. That's quite amazing to
Well,
see that
thanks to
there's.
the neuroimaging, which kind of validates the whole Buddha's approach to, dukkha nirodha, because when we take a look at how the brain operates, it's basically through neural firings, so the
Mhm.
different pathways. And as long as, like I said, as long as you're digging back into your childhood trauma, you're basically using the same neural pathway to remember them, to make them
Ex-
real.
You're reevacuating. You're giving good health to those old neurons in there that you haven't. It's better to let them lie dormant. That's the
Yeah.
whole idea: is to leave that stuff dormant. Don't go digging back in that until you're ready. Now there. That's not to say that you cannot ever remember anything that happened in childhood. In fact, in general, I remember so much about my childhood that it
Mhm.
amazes people. But I
Right.
do it with no longer any emotional baggage tied to it. You see, memories have various components. We
Mm-hmm.
have visual, we have auditory, and we also have feeling memories. So if I
Mm.
remember falling out of a tree that happened when I was 6 years old, and I start remembering that at 7 and 8 and 9, I will bring up the feelings that I had when I fell out of the
Yes.
tree. Now I can
Yes.
just remember falling out of the tree, but I don't have to have those associated feelings because I'm watching what I'm doing.
Yeah. This is
that I
so
can
important.
separate that out, and I can feel good about remembering that I fell out of a tree, and I can feel really good about remembering that I fell out of a tree without having to feel bad about falling out of a tree.
Yeah. And that's the key, to make that distinction between remembering and remembering along with having those associated feelings. That
Mm-hmm.
is key. And what you said is so important, because more and more we see in therapy that that is the kind of approach and a goal that we have, is that not to repress memory, but to be aware of them, and be aware that there are some physical reactions to it. And the whole idea of acceptance, or distracting oneself from those intense feelings, comes into play, which are
I
really
like the
beneficial.
distracting better. That in fact you can use the word distracting, but that would be the point in time that the Buddha talks about changing it from an unwholesome thought into a wholesome thought, or
Yeah.
changing it from an unwholesome attitude into a wholesome attitude.
Mhm.
That's that, but we can talk about it in the sense of redirecting, but we're
Mhm.
actually changing the content of the mind. Okay,
Yes.
this is the point, going back to the repetition. That's what we need to do over and over and over again, is to catch these old thoughts and to change them, because we can see them and we do have choices about what we're going to put in the mind.
So the whole key is deliberation, right? So instead of being distracted automatically by our thoughts, we choose to deliberately distract it in a situation that is going to benefit us towards a more wholesome thought. And yeah, that's the key to being, enlightened, or if you call, some people call it a conscious being, or what's that word, or an aware being, whatever you term it. It just
I
comes down.
know, but those are very highfalutin words. I like to use very simple childlike terms, in the sense that you have been talking yourself into feeling bad your whole life. Now it's time to talk yourself into feeling good. Now that's a very childlike kind. Yeah, that's right. I can talk myself into feeling good. All I have to do is remember to talk myself into feeling good, and I do feel good. I mean,
Yes.
the whole Buddhist teaching is that simple right there.
Yeah. And people have this idea that somehow it goes back to the original sin, that if they focus on feeling good all the time, it may be considered something selfish, which kind of goes back to the original sin idea, right? That you are not good enough, you're not worthy to feel good, to focus on being peaceful, happy all the time. So this inherent inclination towards suffering kind of reinforces these kind of tendencies towards beating oneself up.
I know. First off, we can say that that whole tendency that we have is actually instinct, and it comes out of our nesting or our herding instinct that
Mm,
gives rise then to our socialization. So that
mm,
if you've got this whole group of people who are unhappy and one guy sticks out, he's happy, nobody likes that. They become even more unhappy when one guy is actually happy.
yeah.
All right, so that gets started, and then eventually, let us say that the story goes is that it took about 500 years for the Buddha's actual teachings to mellow out into what we're talking about here, and that mellowing out can be referred to as the Bodhisattva ideal,
Mm,
which is
okay.
stated in the way of all beings have to become enlightened, and then I can become enlightened too. That my
Yeah.
job is to herd cattle into the enlightenment, and I'll be the last one in the gate, right?
Yes.
But you can immediately see that that doesn't work, and all you have to do is say, well, we've got 10,000 bodhisattvas here, and we've got everybody else in paradise, and now the 10,000 are standing there arguing with each other, saying, "You first. No, you go first. I'm going to be the last one in the gate because that's my vow." You see, and I mean, it's a whole idea that doesn't work. But we can take it down to childlike language and say like this: I want everybody to shut up so I can have some peace and quiet.
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
Trying to make everybody happy so I can be happy too is actually part of that instinctual going along to get along.
Yeah.
There's a completely different philosophy to it, though, or another way of looking at it, and that is that how could I possibly make anybody happy if they're miserable and so am I?
Yeah.
Maybe
And
I should withdraw from that, get off into seclusion, get my mind straightened out, and when I go back, now I could be joyful even in the face of their grumpiness, and maybe it will start to rub off.
yes, absolutely. I love that, because then you're not depending on others to make you happy, right? And
Right.
I like to think of this as, compassion. People have this idea that in order to cultivate compassion, you have to be this neutral human being who cannot show reaction. But what we forget is that no matter what kind of spiritual practice we are engaging in, there is going to be a relational being, which really, at a biological level, means that we are not going to stop having this surge of hormones in our body, which may make us angry, which may make us sad. But the thing is, the goal is not to be disturbed by those things, not to be
Okay.
swayed by those reactions, but to take a
Let's state
deliberate
that a
step.
different way. Let's state that a different way, and that is that you, as a human, all of us, are part of humanity, and
Yes.
humanity is not ever going to go the way that you want it to. But that you're not responsible for the way that humanity goes. Your responsibility is how you feel.
Yes.
That's an important quality of this. And so, uh, we I got a couple of stories. One of them is you got a big fishing boat here. I like big fishing boats,
Mhm.
and one of my friends goes overboard.
Okay.
Normal compassion is that, oh, he's overboard, he's having a pity party, misery loves company, I've got to go jump overboard too. Never mind the fact that neither one of us can swim, at least I'm out here in the surf helping my buddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's mostly compassion. That's what the word compassion means. It means you put some skin in that game, but in this case, the skin is, in fact, misery, because misery loves company. Or drowning. You got to go drown too because they're drowning. But
Mm.
there's two other ways of doing it. One is the one that you mentioned, and that is to stay on the boat and don't give a flying rip. But the other one is, the third option is the real compassionate way, and that is stay on board, keep your happiness, and throw them a life raft, throw
Yes.
them a smile, give them a
Yeah.
rope for them, then you can pull them out of their own misery and get them back onto safe territory.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's So that's the Buddha's method, or that's the way that we should go. This is where we talk about metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha. That's friendship, and then compassion. But the Pali word is karuna, and it's not like the compassion that we have here, because
Mhm.
you still want to remain aloof, because you
Mhm.
have to be able to be outside of that suffering in order to help someone else out of it. You
Yes.
cannot go get into their suffering. And now there are places where we talk about it in the sense of pacing and meeting. The
Mhm.
Vander Grinder talked about that, but the Buddha used it also, and that is that sometimes that we have to kind of pretend to be miserable, or to
Mhm.
go in and make some connection so that we get real connection with that person, and then we pop the cork. We take them
Right.
out of it. We pace first, and then we lead. Now, Bander and Grinder had the actually, this actually happened, they say, and that was is that they had uh, for whatever reason, they had opportunity to spend some time with someone who really was in a catatonic psychosis,
Right.
uh, literally frozen. So both Bander and Grinder go into the cell that this guy is in, and one of them takes the pose of this guy who is in the catatonic state, while the other one stands in the corner just observing. And so
Okay.
he stayed that way for about 10 or 20 minutes, just a long time, because the guy was beginning to look at Banner, I think it was Banner, and Banner then looked back at him. And so he began to mirror and mimic all of the little slight movements that the catatonic was making. After
Oh,
he got a really, really good rapport with him, He just looked up and says, "Give me a cigarette." And his buddy there standing in the room handed him a cigarette. And then the buddy poked the pack out, handed a cigarette to the guy who was caught in the catatonic stupor, and he took it. He brought,
Wow.
they were able to bring this guy out of a catatonic stupor, and he had been in that stupor for years, I heard.
Wow.
Smoking's not good for you.
Pardon?
Who said smoking's not good for you?
And who said smoking is not good for you? Exactly. I don't think that it had. I think if this hadn't been done in the early 1970s, if it was done modern, I guess he would have handed him a joint or something. I don't know.
Well, it's relatively safer than a catatonic stupor. We can say that much.
Yeah,
So-
that's right. Cigarettes are a whole lot safer than catatonic stupors. They'll lock you up for that kind of stuff. They did. So that's an example of pacing and leading. And one example also in the time of the Buddha was, in order to get the really good confidence that the Brahmins had, that meant that he had to know what the Brahmins knew. And he had to prove that he knew what they were talking about, and so he could repeat that. And he did so in the suttas. And now people go and say, "Look, that's what the Buddha teaches. He teaches that." No, he's just establishing rapport so that he can gain the trust, and then he can make that change. So there's that issue about compassion also, that you might want to do a few things just to gain the confidence of them, so that they will then grab hold of that lifeline and you can pull them in. You got to get their attention, I guess is the way to say it. So instead of just flailing in the ocean while there's a lifeline right in front of them, you got to get their attention and say, "Hey man, grab that inner tube, grab that buoy or whatever that we've thrown to you." So this is an important point, but this is what we mean by then the mudita, which is what is referred to as sympathetic joy. That's after we make the connection with the person, that's the pulling them in. An example of that, you've got somebody really, really angry, and you can begin to tease them, wink at them, joke with them, begin to tug on them a little bit, you know. Or if you've got some child that's really crying and crying and crying, you can get their attention diverted by doing something with your hands and say, "Can you do that?" And just, you know, we can pull them out of the misery that they're in if we have the ability to do that. That's a skill. That's the skill of a good psychologist, is to be able to see someone caught in their stuff and be able to pull them out of it. And in the process of that, teach that client how to themselves pull themselves out of it, because they're not going to have the psychologists here all the time, but they're still going to get back to their stuff.
Yes, and I totally agree, because in that, when the definition you provided of compassion, which is Buddha's definition, that takes care of the self-preservation need, because we cannot ignore that any individual is first going to be concerned about their own self-preservation.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. No, you have to do all of this from a safe place. Don't go jump in that ocean just because somebody's drowning.
yes, so true. I kind of did the same thing in one case. I remember a year ago, I think. So somebody was really frustrated. This was not a client, just somebody, a friend of mine, say, was really frustrated. And often when we encounter people that are frustrated or angry, or really going through some intense emotion, particularly negative, we kind of say, "Calm down" or "relax." And if you may have noticed that using those words, "calm down" or "relax,"
almost
often
never works.
Yes, because at that point, the person's brain is totally hijacked by negative biases, and he essentially has forgotten for that split second how to relax. Instead, what I did was took a deliberate breath, like a deep breath, and I saw him do the same thing.
Precisely.
Yes, that is so effective. and it had some effect. Well, we cannot.
Well, it only worked because you had already gained some rapport with him so that you could now pull him along or lead him by taking a deep breath, and he will take a deep breath. And then the next breath you can, and relax, and he will too. But if you tell him, relax.
It's also because we're social herd animals.
Yes,
Exactly right.
we often mirror others' behavior, and if we can hijack that and use it in a positive way, everybody is a winner.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So true.
But that only works when the psychologist has just a little bit of power. Okay, that may be extremely useful and valuable, but he can't just say to that client, grim up. He can't say to that client, be happy. He can't tell him that and expect that to happen. If he could, then he would have a kind of power that he for sure would start to abuse.
Yes, absolutely.
That we don't have that kind of power over other people. All we have is the ability to be friendly and suggest or allow them to pull us into their bad feelings.
Yes.
So is this actually easier? Go ahead.
Yeah, modern psychology tries to do that by, putting up ethical codes of conduct and, institutional standards, all of these the verbal abstract concepts,
transference, countertransference, right? Those are the old words, but all about the ethics. And the reason that they have to have any ethics at all is because you really can't trust these psychologists because they really don't have their own acts together yet.
Yes, that is so true. And what the Buddha was doing was treating the psychologist first and then allowing them to have autonomy and be a really nice, compassionate being and trusting them. Right?
I know, that's right. That's part of the way that the sutras are built up, that the Buddha actually had kind of a university because he had big teachers like Mahamogala, Mahakassapa, Sariputta. All of those were his university deans, basically, of the various schools.
Yeah.
And so, yes, he did delegate, and that was why he was able to touch as many people as he did, was because he worked with the very best.
Yes.
In the beginning. He was also, this is something that's kind of unusual as a story, but that whole area of India kind of ran out of medical doctors.
Oh, I see.
And the Ayurvedic doctors of the time were also your best educated, most knowledgeable ones. Guess what? They all become Buddhist monks. So that the very best medical attention one could get was within the Sangha, and so they actually had to start making rules about what diseases if you have this disease, you cannot become a monk, because the only reason you'd want to become a monk is because you've got this disease, and they've got a list of them. This is part of the ordination process, where they're mentioning tuberculosis and smallpox and cholera, mostly as contagious diseases.
Yes.
Right. And so these are actually in the Pali, so they knew the names of the disease even back in those days. But that's very interesting that he did. He took, it's like all of the psychologists in town would now be students of this major Buddha teacher here, and that look how many thousands of people gain advantage because of that they don't have to go to the Buddha themselves. They can just go to someone who has gotten that teaching from the Buddha. And so that's why I'm actually quite happy to see the changes in psychology that are being made, and to think I thought that was my job to educate the whole world, and here it is, psychology is doing my job for me, so that means that my work is done here.
We still need you. So it's a rather a collaboration. Finally.
Well, yes, that's right. We can still do all of that collaboration, cooperation, friendship, all of that kind of stuff. But I think now that you could go so far as to say that that the problems of Western Buddhism have now been exposed. That the real teachings of the Buddha are out of the bag now.
Yeah. So the religious rituals have kind of been strained out.
Right. Exactly. And not only that, but the opportunity to take the magic out of it, to take the power tripping out of it, and give it to where it actually is, based upon friendship and cooperation, and not competition and capitalism.
Yeah.
That it's
Dhammarato, can I take a minute? I think somebody's
Yeah.
at the door. I'll join you in a minute. Yeah. Robert, I'll be back in a minute. Yeah.
See you in a minute.
Okay. Robert, it's so good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too. I think this is a great idea.
Pardon?
I think this is a good idea. These regular meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're going to have one on Sunday for the UK and one on Friday night, which is Saturday morning here for the US. And so we'll do that, and that way everybody can meet each other. I mean, you probably heard of Debbie and Danny, but you haven't met them. So this is Debbie.
I have actually.
Okay.
Well, Danny and I keep meaning to get together, but it hasn't quite happened yet. Debbie and I have been on a call before. So yeah, no, really good. And I think Debbie's in Bristol, isn't she? Yeah. So the potential to actually meet each other in person for real, good.
Yeah, she's finally found some employment in the UK because she's an Indian national, but she's been in the UK. She's been a PhD.
Sorry, it's hanging a bit. What's happened there?
Hello.
Ah, you're back.
Yeah. Oh, I see Dhammarato's screen is frozen a bit.
Yeah, I've frozen a bit.
Well, looky who shows up.
Hi.
Hello, Olivia. Good to see you.
You too.
You want to sit in here?
No, I can just, yeah, I'm still.
So,
Debbie, I'm saying you're in Bristol, aren't you?
Yeah, she's in Bristol. She's just frozen now.
Oh, God, what's going wrong?
You're in Bristol still. Can you hear me, Debbie?
Yeah, no, I couldn't, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Robert was asking you, are you still in Bristol?
Oh, I moved to Weston a couple of months ago, but yeah, it's very new to Bristol. Yeah.
Well, I'm in Bridgewater.
Oh, is that close by?
Well,
She means Weston-super-Mare.
Do you mean Weston-super-Mare?
Weston-super-Mare, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're junction 24 of the M5.
Oh, I'm still not very familiar with the places out here, so I have no idea how far.
About 20 miles away. 20 minutes away.
Oh, that's not far. That's not very far.
No, not far at all. We'll have to meet up sometime. I know that Danny's in Bristol as well.
Yeah. That would be amazing if we can meet up. Is that your daughter?
Yeah,
that's Olivia. Yes. That's
Hi, I'm Olivia.
Hi, I'm Debbie. So nice to meet you.
You too. It's amazing you're only 20 minutes away.
Yeah, we should meet soon. Well, once COVID nightmare is kind of over, maybe. Have you got your jabs then?
What's that? Sorry?
Have you got your vaccination? The COVID vaccination?
Yes, here.
No, not yet.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes, that was weeks ago. We've had our vaccinations here, but Thailand's run out of vaccination serum now. So we're kind of, as a nation, waiting on second dose. My second dose is scheduled for October the 1st.
Oh, okay. So how's the situation there? Is it under control?
Actually, Thailand is complete lockdown.
Oh, I see.
Hospital-wise, they are hospitalizing about 20,000 a day.
Oh, wow.
But they're keeping them in the hospital for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, something like that. And now they've gotten to the point they're discharging at about the same rate that they're taking in new people, so that they're not going to get overflowed. To where in the US, it's just more and more and more people are coming in and getting stuck in the system. Yeah. So in Thailand, the hospital system is capable of taking care of the situation. But really, the situation is not about the coronavirus. It's because everything is locked down. No one goes out on the streets without a mask. Now, we could say that that it is a law, but it is not a law that is enforced or needs to be enforced. That in fact, when it first went into effect, instead of the cops stopping people for not having a mask, they stopped people to give them a mask. That's how they did it in Thailand, that they actually used the police to distribute masks in the early days.
Wow.
You didn't go down the street without getting a mask.
Yeah.
And so that's how the police have handled it. But now I don't know where all the volunteers are coming from, but they have an enormous group of people who are actively working at it. An example is that you cannot get on the ferry to come to this island from the mainland without getting checked. But then when you get to the island, when you get off the ferry, you get checked again. They want temperature. They want to see your ID. They take a picture of you, and if you've been vaccinated, they want to see proof of vaccination. I mean, you just don't travel in Thailand without having. Now, these are not cops. There's no authorities there. These are just good people who have the right cell phone application that they're putting all their stuff into cell phones and collecting the data, in case they do have to do a chase down.
Right.
Because everybody who does have a virus, they check them out. That's why they're able to keep the number of high the way that they are, is because they're actively testing. They are actively requiring masks, and they are actively vaccinating to the point that they've run out of vaccine. And one of the primary groups that they were vaccinating here on this island were the Burmese.
Oh, I see.
Because the Burmese are here for work, but Burma has a major problem with the COVID. And you have people sneaking across the border. I mean, it's really a porous border because it's so long and so big, and there's very few places to cross legitimately, but there are thousands of places to cross illegally. And so the Burmese, it's almost like an easy border, but they'll catch as many of the Burmese as that they can and test them and put them in quarantine. But then they wound up with too many of them in Phuket anyway, and so Phuket had a major outbreak. And because of a major outbreak in Phuket, they took and rushed all the virus medicines that they could and all of the vaccines to Phuket. And they got it under control, but that also caused losses in other places. But anyway, the Thai people themselves are actively engaged with this, almost to the point that the government itself is irrelevant.
Oh, wow. So
but the place is still completely locked down. For instance, there are no flights, no domestic flights, no international flights. In fact, I sent a package to the United States several days ago, and it said it's going to be 4 weeks before it gets there. Fastest delivery from Thailand to the U.S. is 4 weeks delivery, and that's counting on the fact that some planes may start to get airlifted out someday. But right now, everything is shut down. We, Tam's daughter is here. She works and lives in Bangkok, and she's stuck on this island. She can't get back to Bangkok.
Oh, wow.
But she's a welcome house guest. I'm really glad she's here. It's okay with me that the aircraft, that the airports are closed.
Yeah. Yeah, so we can say that the COVID, along with all the headaches and all the uncertainty, has also given us some an opportunity to spend quality time with our family, hasn't it?
It is amazing like that. In fact, I will probably publish it on here. Let me see if I can get it up easily enough. What this is an. That's not what I wanted to do. Back to this. Mm-hmm. No, wait a minute. Is that it? Got it. Okay, so that's the link that I'm just sending. And the name of it is Why Are So Many Knowledge Workers Quitting Their Jobs?
Oh,
Now,
okay.
about 2 years ago, I had a conversation with Willie. It wasn't 2 years ago. It was actually February of 2020 when they were just beginning to shut down everything in the United States. And I said, that's a really, really good thing that this COVID virus has a silver lining big time. Okay, for one thing, look at the oil prices are just now coming back because we've had basically 18 months of clear skies.
Mm-hmm.
The airplanes have been out of the air. It's almost like Mother Nature devised the COVID vaccine just to give humanity a message to chill out.
Yeah, yeah.
And now they're chilling out. And this article is to show that, in fact, that people are really reluctant now that they recognize that they did not work for a year and they did not starve. Because everybody's got that belief is that if you don't eat, you don't live. Excuse me, you don't work, you don't eat. And now people are figuring out, oh, I don't work and I don't eat. Maybe I can just continue to not work and I'll continue to eat. And therefore, and so there's going to be a major revolution that this COVID virus has been a spark in that direction, that things are going to move along now even better than they would have without the coronavirus. You could say that people are literally waking up.
Yes. It's
By being at home, they're beginning to take a look at their lives. They're beginning to do what they told the guy in the Star Wars movies, to go home and think about your life. Well, people went home and they started thinking about their lives, and now they don't want to go back to work. And so I see that as a very healthy thing for humanity.
Yes.
A year-long relaxation in the economy, and the economy is still alive. I mean, we haven't lost anything.
Yeah. That just shows how much of our worries and anxieties are made up by us, right? It's just constructions that are abstract and man-made, really.
Yes, but the problem is not that they're man-made and each individual makes their own and that's all there is to it. No, this is a society, or what they call a systemic issue. Mm-hmm. It's a system-wide, it's our culture is the problem. And the Buddha knew that. That's why we have that Pali word of sila bhatta paramasa, that each individual one of us attaches to these rules and rituals that are our society.
Yes.
And our society tells us you got to go work for our society and let the big man make all the money for your labors, and thou shalt be happy. That's the story. Guess what? People work for the big man, let him have all of his money, and what do you got? You got nothing.
Yeah. Just a lot of misery.
That's right. That's what our culture is. It's a very exploitive economy, but the problem with it is at the top, the people at the top are as miserable as the people who they are exploiting. No
Yes,
one is a winner in this game.
yes.
But the more
And
money
that
you
can,
win, the more money you have, the more miserable you wind up being.
yes. The search for better or search for more never ends. And it's
Never
weird,
ends.
right? Because all of this is very relative, we think that the big people sitting in those massive mansions are going to have it easier, but it's not true. At their level, they are relatively sad, depressed, and
And greatly
unprivileged from
fearful
their,
of what they do have will be
yeah,
taken away from them.
yes,
They
that
got
is,
all of that wealth as protection. The general idea is that wealth will protect me and I will feel safe. That's why people want to be wealthy, is so they'll feel safe and secure. Except that when they get the money, now they got two problems. Not only do they continue to feel safe and insecure themselves, now their fortune is also unsafe and insecure, and now they have to guard both of them. Now
yes,
they have to guard their own fear and guard the fear of losing their wealth.
yes.
Unfortunately, that's not a winner's position to be in.
Nope, it's not.
And so the wealthy, they wind up being super miserable.
Mm-hmm.
There are
Yes.
exceptions.
Yeah.
Most of them are generous.
Well, that's the way out. And philanthropy is the way out for the super wealthy. That some of them learn that. In the United States, you have examples like Henry Ford with the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation. Bill Gates is giving away a lot of his money. That
Mm-hmm.
Zuckerberg hasn't learned it yet, but his ex-wife is giving away billions of dollars out of Facebook money
I
because she
think that
can't.
can be. I think
Go
we
ahead.
can point to two reasons people can do this. One is just getting around, trying to figure out ways to evade tax. One reason can be that, and a second reason is just a psychological compensation. They are aware of how privileged they are and that they are, in a way, exploiting others. And then this
Exactly.
idea of giving material wealth back kind of helps them to basically sleep at
It
night.
absolved them of their guilt of the fact that they stole most of that money anyway.
Yes.
By giving it back as philanthropy is the only, and it's a very, it's a very meager result. Imagine that you spent your whole life
Mm-hmm.
working, slaving, cheating, hoodwinking people, amassing money. And not only did you start to amass money, but in your wisdom, you began to find out who your best victims would be, and that is other wealthy people. That if you're going to steal a lot of money, you better steal it all from one rich guy rather than stealing it from a whole lot of poor folks.
Yeah.
So now the rich are stealing from the rich, and they're all embroiled in this taking money from each other,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody's happy. Everybody winds up being miserable trying to protect the wealth that they have because they thought that the wealth would protect them in their insecurity. If you come out of your insecurity, you don't need so much money.
Yeah, that's so true.
But our society is teaching all of the little children the more money you have, the better off you'll be. And that's not at all the case.
Yeah.
Having something that somebody else wants is dangerous.
So would you say it becomes a matter of striking a healthy balance? Because we cannot deny the fact that we need to be able to provide for ourselves. But
Here we go. Is your balance meaning that you're going to go off and do stuff in order to survive, work and whatnot, and you don't enjoy it? In other words, you're willing to be miserable in order to be safe.
right.
But there's another way of doing it, and that is that once you learn how to be happy and enjoy your life, then whatever you choose to do can be a joy. You literally turn your work into a toy.
Yeah.
And that most people don't know how to do that because they need the job. They think that they have to work. Listen to the language, work and job.
Yeah.
That a more neutral word would be employment, but a safe word, a really good word, would be a toy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't do any work. I just play all day.
Mm. Yes.
And if you play wisely, you can make some money at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Okay. Or if you've already got a job, you can change your attitude about that job. For instance, the new job that you're getting, if you go into that job with the idea that, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake, I'm going to have so much fun, I'm going to learn a whole lot of stuff, and you go into it with that, then it's not work.
yeah. Yeah.
It's something that you like to do.
Yes. Something very related to this is imposter
So it's
syndrome.
not a balance now, is it? Now it's not weighing things out.
It's a
Now
shift
it's
in
just going
perspective.
from one joy to the next joy, and you do what you want to do and get a big kick out of it, and everything is good, and you don't have to call it work and hate it. That's part of our society. We are told what to
Yeah.
do, and we are told, and we do it, but there's built-in resentment. We do what we're told to do, and we don't like it. So
Mm.
that means that we can come up with either resentment, authority figure issues. This is it. Okay, you've heard about
Yeah.
that term, right? That's a psychological term. Authority
Yeah.
issues is the child that did what he was told to do and he resents it and he grows up with the primary feeling of resentment and
Yes.
he winds up rebelling and he doesn't even know what he's rebelling against, like the rebel without a cause. We're just
Yeah.
any authority figure that I can find, I'll find them just so that I can rebel against them. That's one of the ways.
Yes.
But other people choose guilt. They do
Yes.
rebel a little bit and then they feel guilty. And so they wind up feeling guilty all the time or much of the time, big guilt about a little rebellion. But
Yes.
no one winds up doing what they were told to do and do it happily and joyfully because they themselves can see it's the wise thing to do.
And this plays out in inside ourselves as well, the kind of narratives we have it with ourselves. For instance, I recently figured out that people often struggle with maintaining healthy behavior change, say dieting. And one of the biggest things that happens is when people go into making these behavior changes with the idea that I'm not going to be okay without this, or that something is wrong with me and I need to fix it, or that I'm not good enough, I have to improve my, say,
Mm-hmm.
eating habit, then what happens is there is this inner child rebellion tendency within ourselves, which kind of triggers those defense mechanisms, and boom,
Exactly.
you're struggling with persisting with your behavior. But instead, if we can be okay with how we are right now, and then we choose to be better for ourselves, then we can counter those resistance and those defensive strategies within ourselves, and it's going to be much more easier to enjoy what we are doing, as well as persisting with what we are doing. Like,
Yes.
say if we want to eat healthy, many people choose to starve themselves. They often do not like that, but they think they would benefit from that, right? So there is that conflict of not liking something that they want to do, but they have the idea that they need to do that to be okay. But instead, if we can make healthy choices that are fun as well,
Yeah.
then it's more easier to persist with that and be happy at the same time. I
Right.
think that kind of matches with what you were saying about
Yes,
employment.
exactly. Exactly. And the diet is another example of that too. But the going back to that issue about going along to get along, that actually then goes into that diet thing of, oh, you must do a diet. And the
Yeah.
child goes along with the diet to get along, but then it
Mhm.
rebels. And so
Yes.
diets don't often work because the child rebels because he didn't like it in the first place.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so there's other things that we can do instead of starving ourselves, hoping that we'll look better again sometime.
Mhm.
Another way of looking at it is that look how strong I am right now. I can resist that donut. I don't have to eat it right now. I don't need it, and I feel really good about the fact that I can say no to it right now.
Yes.
And so that's actually now is changing that whole attitude from the loser's mentality of you ought to go on the diet. Yeah, okay, I'll go on a diet, but I don't want to, and watch how soon I'm going to mess it up. To that new point of view of I can do this, I can handle this. At least I can handle this donut.
Yeah.
Right here
So
in this present moment, I can handle this donut. And if I can handle this donut, I get the attitude I can handle the next donut too.
yes, and then reinforce it with celebration.
Exactly. That's the celebration I'm talking about. Yeehaw, I can do this. We need to
Yes.
give ourselves that celebration, that pat on the back, that attaboy, that we can
Yes.
do it. That's that attitude. In the sutras, it's the sama sankappa, one's right noble attitude that you can do it. And in fact, there's a line in the sutra that says that the first knowledge on the path, and that's an important point right there, the first knowledge on the path is that no matter how obstructed the mind becomes with all of the stuff that we've been talking about, I can clean it out and come back to this present moment and see things the way that they are. That is a knowledge, that's a confidence that no matter how obstructed the mind gets, I can clean it out. And then the
Yes.
Buddha says that this first knowledge is super mundane. It is noble. It's a factor of the path, and it's not held by ordinary people because ordinary people think that they're stuck with what their thoughts are. That, oh, poor me, I can't do anything about it. So this is a major change of attitude. This whole
Yes.
point is to change the attitude to, by gosh, I can do this. I can become free of my own crap. But I only have to do it one thought at a time. One unwholesome thought gets changed to a wholesome thought, and that's all we have to do. Going back to that analogy or that example of the cement with the weed coming up, all we have to do is to see the weed putting up a shoot, and we whack it off, and that's all there is to it. And so we can celebrate and dance. Wow, I got that weed.
So, and when you're doing that, it's obviously important or beneficial to keep in mind that we are not thinking about the future, that when we are pulling that weed out, we don't think, oh, it's going to come back again and I'll have to do it again.
Well, if it does, I'll take care of it again. I just got it. I'll get it again next time.
Yes.
Rather than the, oh, poor me, I am doomed now to pull weeds out of the cement.
Yes.
Because that's the defeatist attitude, rather than, hey, I got that one.
Yeah.
I can get that next one too. There it is. Ah, I got it. I got you. Okay, that's the whole new attitude of coming out of seeing the job as a major job, lifetime issues, many, many years of hard work. Or let us say a whole symphony of da-da-da-das. We don't have to do a whole symphony of da-da-da-das that lasts for years. We only have to do this one da-da-da-da.
Yes.
And we do it again, da-da-da-da. Okay?
Yes.
Da-da-da-da. That's just one little thing. That's all we need to do. And if you keep doing it over and over again, you've got a symphony.
Yeah. And these simple teachings can neutralize so many like complex issues. Like when I started applying for jobs, I was aware of this imposter syndrome. I was like, oh my God, I don't know anything. How am I going to be able to do any job? Right. But I realized it comes from this idea that I have to be a certain way, that I have to be perfect, and that I cannot make mistakes, and everything has to be a certain way. But then
that's the way that most people take interviews, and that's why they fail. Then if you go into an interview with, this is a piece of cake, and that interviewer and I are going to have a ball together. We're going to find connections, and we're going to talk, and we're going to have fun together. If you go into an interview like that, you'll probably get the job, just like you did.
Yeah, I did. So yeah, that really helped me. I just decided that I'm going to embrace the fact that I'm a human being. I can make mistakes. I'm not there to please everybody, and people may not like me, and that is absolutely okay. But if I'm aware of all the weaknesses that I have, I can offer people that I am ready to acknowledge it and can improve. And that is such a stronger position to be in, rather than, maintaining this image that I'm a perfect individual who is going to solve all your life's problem. But if I can flip that and say, hey, I know I can't do everything, but I can try. I have been trying and I have succeeded.
The guy who has that attitude is not likely to get the job because he's intimidating the interviewer rather than making friends with him.
Yes.
A lot of know-it-alls are like that. I played that game too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's that middle path that we keep referring to in the teaching of the Buddha. Yeah, you have to have supreme competence, just not more competence than the interviewer.
Yes, absolutely.
Because we're going to hear.
And confident in the fact that you are a human being, which means obviously you're going to have strengths and weaknesses, and that is okay. I am really confident that I'm a mixed bag, and that's how everybody is, and there's no hiding. But most people deny the fact that we are a mixed bag, and they try to focus on the goods. And while they're doing that, they're automatically suppressing, denying all of that.
Can I change the language just a little bit?
Sure.
When you use the word mixed bag, you're still going back to that conversation that we had earlier about all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, or that your original sin, or you're a mixed bag and it's kind of semi or permanent.
Mm.
Another expression to use, which I like very much, and it's also a very childlike phrase, is sometimes you feel like a nut and sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
Because now we're taking into account this present moment. In this present moment, sometimes you feel like a nut, and in this present moment, sometimes you don't.
But
you're not a mixed bag, because the mixed bag means that you're constantly feeling like a nut and also feeling not like a nut, and that's a major conflict within the mind of holding, conservation of space, that two objects cannot occupy the same place at the same time, and so we get into a mental conflict. But when you recognize, no, every moment keeps changing, that sometimes I feel like a nut and sometimes I don't, that's okay.
Yeah.
We have to give ourselves permission to fail, because, that's the only way to learn anything. If you were completely perfect, you wouldn't learn anything.
Yeah.
If you never made a mistake, you have no opportunity to learn. So let's go out and screw stuff up so that we can learn something about it.
Yes. And learning is basically repetition, right? Like you said. So essentially, whatever we learn is basically repetition. So if we can learn to consciously repeat those wholesome thoughts, behaviors, then we are set for success.
That's right, because we're having those thoughts.
Sorry,
I couldn't hear you. Pardon?
I think the key word there is conscious.
Yes.
Repeating and repeating and repeating isn't particularly effective, but consciously repeat. Conscious practice.
Yes, absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, that's the sati, to wake up. Let's see what we're doing. Let's take a look at the present moment. Let's look at the data. That's the way. But most people, in fact, the psychologists and the neuroscientists are looking at the fact that actually thinking, even though we do it so much of the time, is actually takes energy and it takes work. And so we wind up also not thinking quite a lot of time. It's better to just fall back on old ways of doing things, which is back to the instinct.
Yes.
You have probably heard someplace along the line that the human uses only about 10% of his brain. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
Okay, it comes out of the 1950s. A much more modern and closer understanding is that, no, the human being can use all of his brain, and he does a lot. He uses it about 5 or 10% of the time. He's using the whole mind. But 95% of the time, he's just relying upon instinct. We let the automatic pilot take over and run our lives.
I'm so glad you said that, because even the whole idea of conscious, subconscious, and unconscious is being kind of replaced by this idea of deliberation versus automatization, and there are several levels, right? So the automatic part would be what we commonly refer as the instinctual part. So basically, just because of repetition, we
learned
require.
it through repetition. That's exactly right. But now we have to use the old noggin and remake the thing and make those changes and start repeating that. And pretty soon that becomes the default.
Yes.
And we have literally talked ourselves into feeling bad our whole lives. And now we're consciously talking ourselves into feeling good. And we pretty soon start to feel good because we can talk about it. An example of that is, imagine on a tree that you've got a limb that's a fairly good sized limb. All right. And you can take that limb or that branch and you can pull down on it and maybe even get it to touch the ground with some of its leaves. But when you let go, it's going to spring right back up to where it was. But if you keep pulling that limb down and holding it in position, it will eventually, it'll spring back, and it'll keep springing back, but it won't spring back quite as far. It won't go back up as well. Or another way of saying that weed will put up a new shoot, but it won't be quite as healthy as it was after it's been whacked off 20 or 30 times.
Yes.
And so this limb begins to get trained. And pretty soon, if you keep holding it down and putting it down and putting it down over and over again, it will begin to take that position. That's nature. You can see it, that if that works within, that repetition works within nature for bending a limb or cutting off a weed, it certainly works inside one's own mind. The human mind is, we keep bending it out of the unwholesome into the wholesome, and pretty soon it tends to bend into the wholesome all by itself.
Yes. Yeah, going back to what you said about humans using only a certain percentage of the brain, it is not entirely accurate. It seems that there are different networks, right? So one is dedicated to the more deliberate processing of information, which is more like the frontal cortex, the more evolved part of the brain. And then we have the more automated pathways, which are responsible for the so-called instinctual behaviors.
Right, especially amygdala. The amygdala is probably the worst case in it.
Oh, yeah. So we definitely don't use the whole brain at a time, but we use a relatively large amount of the brain at any given time. But the distinction is between that automatic and more deliberate part. And what makes that distinction is a salience network, which is the network which is heavily influenced by our emotional processing units. So, and this is so interesting, right? Because when we think we are and when we encounter something which is potentially threatening to us, whether real or symbolic threat, then those salience networks fire up the flight or fright, the instinctual animalistic processing, and we are immediately processing information in a very automatic and animalistic way. But if we can hijack that salience network and maintain a detached emotional, processing, then we can utilize that deliberate pathways for a more task-focused orientation.
Precisely.
And then take care of worry.
Let's look at that hijacking.
Yes.
That's the instant, okay? The hijacking, that's the important point right there, because once the hijacking is done, now we know what to do. Okay?
Yes.
This hijacking is what in Buddha's tradition would be considered sati, or the wake up. How can you hijack something if you haven't woken up to be able to take that kind of control? So this is the sati that we need. If we have the sati, that means that we can remember to put these new skills into practice. Doesn't matter what skills we have, if we don't remember to use them, then the skills are kind of worthless in that moment that we've forgotten to use them. So sati is that waking up ability that gives us the chance to hijack that
Yes.
automatic system of feeling. That in fact, you know that, let's use the adrenaline gland as an example. The adrenaline gland is sitting right adjacent to both the kidneys and the liver.
Yes.
Way down here in the back.
Yes.
Okay,
Just on
but
the
there
top.
is
Yeah.
a major pathway, a neurological pathway, right to the pituitary glands and the pineal glands, which are associated in the back of the head back here.
Yes.
And so it's that reptilian, or the back part of the brain, that actually controls the adrenaline gland, which is that automatic system. They call it the reptilian brain because it's the same kind of shape as an alligator, say. And the way
Yes.
that I talk to the students about it is that means that anything that an alligator can do, that you can do, you do it the same part of the brain that the alligator does when he's doing it. So alligators walk with the reptilian part of their brain. So do you. All of the
Yes.
body movements, all of the feelings, all of the emotions, and in fact, the language that you could say of the anterior cortex is the language of chemistry, or the language of feelings. To
Mm.
where the the cortex around here that we call the temporal lobe, some call it the mammalian brain, and it's the has both. This is actually where it's stored about all the rites, rules, rituals, ways to do things, idealism, criticism, critical mind, all of that kind of stuff comes out of it. And that's also where we have language. This is the
Yes.
part of the brain that is a higher part of the brain, but dogs have it because dogs have a very complicated language system. Monkeys have a very, very complicated language system. And so they have it too. But what they don't have is this frontal cortex. And
Yes.
that's what we need to get into gear. Because
Yes.
basically what happens is that this temporal lobe, or this, Freud called it the parent ego state. Or no, that was Byrne. He called it the superego. It's the
Yes.
authority that we have within. And it's always, its language is vocabulary and words.
Yes.
And so what you have is you have language like, you ought to go meditate. And then that reptilian brain says, I don't want to meditate. But he says so, not with words, but he says so with, he
Yes.
says so with a feeling.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so this dialogue, this verbal dialogue between, you ought to do this, no, I don't want to. Well, you ought to do that, no, I don't want to. You ought to go on a diet, no, I don't want to. Okay, I'll go along to get along, but I'll
Yeah.
resent it. I'll be angry. I'll be frustrated. I'll have authority issues. I'll feel guilty. And think, I could have been having a ball all the time. I could have enjoyed that diet.
Yeah. Yeah. I wrote an article. I didn't publish it yet, but it was titled, I tried escaping my parents, but I couldn't. They still live in my brain. which is basically the social representation of these, the verbal representations of
Okay,
these.
can I give you a subtitle?
Yes.
Okay, so the subtitle is then, so I made friends with them.
Yes. I end it with that.
Yeah, you can't
Yes.
you can't take the country out of the boy. You can't take the parenting out of the child's mind. But
Mhm.
you can allow the child to become aware of that stuff so that we
Yes.
can deal with it correctly.
Yes.
Okay.
So
That in fact, you could go so far as to say that all the laws, rites, rules, rituals, and everything that the parents said was not wrong exactly. It's that the child responded to it in an unhappy way. And
yeah.
so now we go around doing a lot of good things for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
And
So it's basically
but
the
we have a
struggle with
choice about that.
authority.
Normally, we also have the choice of going around and doing the wrong things for the wrong reasons.
We sure do.
But if we wake up, then we can start to recognize what's wrong with this thing, and we can make friends with it.
Yes.
When we're making friends with this critical parent, what we can call it now is a nurturing parent. That Byrne was talking about this nurturing, nurture yourself. Allow yourself to feel really good inside. That, hey,
Yeah.
you are a good boy. that we
I
really
think,
do need to train ourselves the way that dog trainers train dogs. They don't whip a dog when it misbehaves, but they really treat it when it does it correctly. And here we
yeah,
have been in our culture of humans that if the human child misbehaves, you bang on it, beat on it, and trying to make it correct. And when the child cries, then the parent gets angry and frustrated and starts to beat the child.
the distinction between punishment and negative reinforcement. Yeah, very true.
Right.
I think a neuroscientist called Dan P. Brown. I'm not sure I remember his name correctly. I'll send you a message. He wrote a theory about attachment issues in adulthood. And there he mentions about how these interactions with our parents, if particularly it's a critical parent, how those kind of play out in our adult relationships. And
Mm-hmm.
he introduced this concept. He basically borrowed it from, again, Tibetan Buddhist teachings, and he utilizes the practice of visualizing the ideal parent. So you visualize it first, and then you try to incorporate that into the kind of narratives that play out in your head with yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
it's again coming back to that nurturing parent within yourself, which is very effective.
Yes, it is. To change that critical mind into nurturing mind is exactly what the Buddha means by going from the second noble truth into
Yes.
the third noble truth. And in fact, critical mind is that ignorant, I like this, I don't like that, this is good, this is bad, this house is nice, but I want a bigger house. And we wind up comparing, contrasting, comparing, and competing. That is the whole mindset that we've got in with this critical parent. And
Mhm.
by seeing that we are actually being critical of ourselves unnecessarily, that's why the child is rebelling, is because this is unnecessary criticism that the parent keeps getting. But it's the habit that we build up as being critical. So we have to start practicing over and over again, with this repetition of changing that critical into nurturing. To
Mm.
start
Yes.
nurturing that child and let ourselves feel really good. This is the actual practice of anapanasati, but we're using psychological language to describe what the Buddha could find in his own language 2,500 years ago. I just find that always, I'm just so amazed that we've got now this new language to describe in psychological terms what
Yeah.
they knew 2,500 years ago.
Hey, he didn't need to do 2 master's degrees.
Well, it's that easy. I mean, it's almost like, why did it take the Buddha so long? We should have figured this out 5,000 years ago.
Yes. Yes. So it's definitely a combination of intensity and also that, again, that mindset or perspective, because you see, social comparison is how we relate as human beings. We are all the time comparing things, comparing information rather, to make sense of them. So you see a bowl and you start comparing it with other things that you already know for yourself to understand that, okay, it is a bowl, not a bottle. Right? That comparison is essential, but what we forget is that we don't need to overdo it. Like when we are comparing ourselves with others unnecessarily, that can be detrimental. So there is that, quality of maintaining, being aware of appropriateness or the intensity with which we compare ourselves to others, and also the mindset, because if you're comparing with others with the mindset that we are not good enough, or if we are not exactly at par with somebody else that we are comparing with, that means that we are bad or flawed. That can be a problem. But if we can compare us with others and then see, oh, okay, this is a potential place that we can work on, we can improve, this is something we can learn, then that is going to be more easy on us.
Okay, let's look at that from a couple of different directions. One of them is that if I'm in this position and I'm looking over at this extreme, anything between that I'm looking in that direction, it's hard to see the difference between this and that. And we begin from this perception to see this is the same as that. Now, the example that we have is the one that you were just mentioning, and that is that if we start to make a change, a student said this one time. He says, well, if I start being happy all the time, then I'll never get out of bed. Okay, you can see he's taking that to the extreme. And my answer was in the beginning, and I recognize that I could have taken a different approach, but the first answer that I had was that, well, that sounds great. If I don't have any reason to get out of bed, why should I bother?
Yes.
All right, so, but that's a bit confusing. But a better way of looking at it is, no, let's recognize that this is the middle path. That if you're over here, the only answer is not way over there. His idea is that I either feel miserable and continue to work, or I feel good and lay in bed and don't get anything done. So those are the two extremes. There's a middle place in there. If we cannot practice the feel good, then we'll never feel good. And we can, in fact, learn to feel good and then go do what needs to be done and do it happily.
So we don't have to completely stop wanting more or stop wanting, but we can do it in a more neutral and sophisticated way, rather than just being, I want more and I have to be miserable about it, right? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. However, we need to actually look at that wanting quality to recognize that drives us. That's, in fact, suffering itself is wanting stuff that we can't have.
Yeah.
And in fact, you could say that part of the issue then is that we are ignorant of what's the distinction between what's possible and what's not possible. So we're wanting things that are impossible, and we don't get what we want, and so we wind up being miserable year after year, life after life. But if we start looking at it through wisdom, then we can refine what we want so that we can get what we want. And we know we can get what we want, and that's the winner's attitude. We can get what we want because I want things wisely. If I want things ignorantly, I'll never get what I want, because there's no end to the things that I wanting and wanting and wanting.
Yeah, and psychology has managed to put even what you said right now, even this teaching, into neat therapeutic box. It has managed to package it into a therapeutic box, and I'll tell you how. So we recently have this therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, a big part of which is goal setting, and any goal is based on wanting. So in this kind of training, people are trained to set goals that are realistic to themselves, which can be worked upon, which can be which is time bound. That is, it doesn't drag on and on and on forever, but you can't measure the outcome. So that's basically just repackaging what Buddha said about wanting and desire into a therapy again. So yeah, plagiarism a lot.
Yes, in a way, going back to that dog and the dog treats, if you do perform, then give yourself the treat.
Yes.
Go ahead and allow yourself. And the basic treat is that I can clean out unwholesome thoughts and put a wholesome thought in my mind. And now I treat myself for being able to do that. Yippee, I can change my mind.
Yes, very much.
And so this has been a really great conversation. I really enjoyed it. We should do this again sometime. But yeah, connecting the fact that Buddhism is actually going to be quite beneficial to psychology. And the Buddhists don't have to be jealous over the newfound success of the psychologists, because all we're really interested in is human welfare. And if psychology is beginning to step up to the plate.
Yeah. I like the idea of acknowledging that there are more shades between either and or. I like using the word and rather than either or. So basically, the Dhamma and the psychology coming together is a manifestation of that andness, the acknowledging that both can be together and both can collaborate on benefiting others. Because a major part is people's interest. Some people may be inclined to go for therapy, which is one kind of packaging, and some people may be interested in spiritual practice, which is saying the same things but in a different packaging, in a different language.
I know, but the funny part of it is that many psychologists now, when a new person comes, they will actually get them involved with meditation. That Tucker Peck and many other psychologists are really involved with that. Is that whole, and when we talk about it, meditation, we're basically talking about giving the client both permission and a tool to do that repetitiveness over and over and over again. That's what the real practice of meditation is to continue to practice being wholesome.
Yes.
But on the other side, with psychology, with Buddhism, because of the way that it started, we have things like choiceless awareness and also noting. And what they note is they keep noting what's just there.
Okay.
By noticing what's just there, that's actually keeping us stuck in the old ways that it was. That real noting would be to note it, recognize that this is unwholesome, and then change it. It's it's the change package that makes things work. And
Absolutely.
so I'm glad to see that both psychology and Buddhism are beginning to get together, and they're going to mutually benefit one another.
Yes, very much. I'm so glad we had this conversation.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Robert, do you have anything to add?
Have any of you read Master and the Emiracy?
I'm sorry, Mastered what?
Have any of you read The Master and His Emiracy?
No, I haven't. I'm
No,
sorry.
I don't know that book.
Ian McGilchrist. And it's he was a lecturer in English at Oxford University, and then he trained as a doctor and then became a psychiatrist.
Oh, wow.
That's the typical way it's done.
Yeah. And his
I think
hypothesis.
that's the only way it's done. You got to be a medical doctor first and then psychiatric.
Yeah.
Well, he was a doctor of English first.
Oh, not a medical doctor. Sorry about that. Okay.
Yeah, then a medical doctor, and then a psychiatrist.
Wow.
But
he was as confused in his childhood as I was.
He was always curious why the brain was split.
Mm.
2 lobes.
Yes.
And basically,
he didn't get worried about the fact that he's got 2 hands.
He definitely
he never got around to understanding symmetry, huh?
Right, symmetry.
The way that things are looked with 2 ears, 2 eyes, 2 nose, 2 hands, 2 feet, 2 legs, all of that kind of stuff, you'd kind of expect that the brain would work that way too.
But you see that highlights people's interest in knowing the unknowable. Just because you can't see the brain, it's automatically more interesting, and people start questioning, why is it so? Giving any body part. Let's get to the brain.
Well, they've already figured out that frontal lobotomies or cutting that connecting tissue between the 2 major lobes does not help.
No.
Yeah.
And he uses an awful lot of brain injury cases to illustrate his point, which is that the left and the right brain see the world in different ways. And that, for example, someone who has a right brain stroke by an awful lot of neurologists are considered fortunate because they will retain the ability to speak.
Yes.
He says this view is now changing.
Yes.
Because
So
Yes, I was about to say. In fact, I didn't want to get in an argument with you, but yeah, there's new research
you're
going
not going
on.
to get
Please
an argument
continue.
because if you have a right brain stroke, your whole worldview collapses. No, you won't be able to speak anymore, but your worldview remains coherent, together, understandable. If you have a left brain, here I am. But if you have a
Aneurysm
right,
or whatever they call it, right?
all of a sudden the world falls apart. It starts to feel unreal. It starts to feel like a dream.
Right.
You don't speak anymore, but you're more likely to stay together as a human being. And the whole book is about the different ways in which the left and the right hemispheres see the world. So the right hemisphere sees in holistic terms. It tends to see without judgment. It's more inclined to see things as they are, and it's more inclined to see things without a sense of self. Whereas the left brain likes to categorize. It likes to chop things up. It likes to grasp. That's where the wanting comes from. I need, I want. This is mine, comes from. And his point is going back to what we were talking about earlier, is that we are being pushed more and more into left brain thinking by education, by society. And this is in fact very, very dangerous because we lose this perspective of this holistic view, and it's making us very unhappy, basically.
Yes.
But society, in fact, wants us to have this left brain view of the world because we can be manipulated through it.
Yes, it can. That's exactly right. Now, one of the things about that research is that they're actually working with stroke patients. And then, in fact, before you came on, I think this is what Debbie and I were talking about, is the whole mentality of psychology has changed from a broken model, like people who have these kind of strokes, and then studying those people.
Yes.
Now we're studying, or the psychology is studying normal people and finding out that some of that brain research that they were done because the lobes were split and because of that, and seeing what's left, they failed to really understand the real connections between the two halves of the brain, that it's actually just one system with a huge amount of intercommunications.
I think
yes.
McChrist is saying is that they are effectively, the book's called The Master and the Embassy for a reason.
The Master of the Embassy?
Embassy. In other words,
Embassy, that's even worse.
the king's servant.
Right.
Yeah. His argument is that the right brain, this holistic, and indeed this is how the brain tends to work, is that information comes in through the right brain and then is taken by the left brain, generally speaking, for further processing. Yeah?
Okay.
And this is what enables us to take in what the right brain has brought to us, chop it up into bits, and build moon rockets. Yeah?
Right.
Okay.
But the point is, we've become so left-brained that the left brain has started to think it's boss, and it. Yeah.
I agree with the idea of holistic perception. I like that idea, but I don't think I completely agree with the distinction between left brain and right brain, because I'll tell you why. Like Dhammarato said, that these researches were done on stroke patients, and with neuroimaging, we can now see that in many cases after stroke, a portion of the function that was earlier accomplished by the right brain can be taken on by the left brain. So vice versa. So when we conduct a study on stroke patients, it becomes difficult to ascertain what kind of function is carried on by which part of the brain in a normal individual.
You're saying this much better than I would have. Thank you for rescuing me. Yes, that's the way of thinking about it. We can see that in many places. An example is someone who is blind begins to pick up other perceptual input that most people can't do. Other examples of that is idiot savant, to where a lot of the things that they can do, they don't do very well, like other people. But one little thing that happens, and then like being able to count cards or do mathematics or do something like that, is just these individuals have skills that very, very few people have, and everybody's jealous. Except when we recognize, wait a minute, this is a brain malfunction, then this is just an example, because there's other problems there too.
Yes,
it's not just that he's a savant, that he's an idiot, and that's the problem.
Yeah. There seems to be some preferential processing of information, like the left brain prefers to do something more than the right brain, but it's not that if we cut off one, the other one is going to process in an entirely different way. That may be in some cases for some individuals, but it's generally for healthy patients, that's not how the brain works. With neuroimaging like fMRI, PET scans, and all of those functional imaging, we can see now that the brain basically has very widespread networks, right? So, and earlier, what we used to think that a certain lobe or a certain part of the brain is as a whole
only one function.
Yes, had only one function. It's not so. It turns out that even those structures have micro units. So tiny spots within the structures have connection with other tiny structures and tiny units and other structures. So it's really like a mess. If you think of the brain being a mass of blob that fires in different patterns, that would be.
That's right. There's several examples of that. One of them is that when they're doing some of these MRIs, and they're doing certain kinds of experiments, in almost all cases, not just one place in the brain lights up with extra lead. It's all over the place. There's a little pocket here, a little pocket there. One of them is that when people are doing mathematics, that there is something on the side of the temporal lobe. It's in this area right here. And those things really get bright, but other things do too, because there's connections and going back and getting memories and other.
Is a very interesting example, because when you're just doing arithmetic, order of process work, as an accountant would do, that tends to be a very left brain activity. It's dun 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 dun. Yeah. But when you start getting into higher mathematics, which starts becoming very creative, then it becomes much more whole brain.
Yeah, again, that process of automatization versus deliberation, right? So, there is an argument that with more abstract processing, like maybe inferential statistics or something like that, more of the frontal cortex is being recruited when we do that task compared to a simple addition or multiplication. right? So I agree that there are different levels in which we kind of operate with numbers or words.
And here's another point about that, and that is that to do the high-level conceptualizations of the frontal cortex with that higher mathematics requires the assistance of the arithmetic part of the brain also. That you can't do that higher math without having the and so that's why various portions work together with it. One of the very interesting parts is the cerebellum, because the cerebellum is in the back. It's very strongly connected with the what are the optical processing?
Occipital lobe.
Right. The optical lobes and all of that are in the back, and right below it is the cerebellum. And the cerebellum of humans is much, 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 much larger than most animals. That's one of the things that makes the reptilian brain of the human a bit different than other animals, because our cerebellum is so large. But that means then, because they used to think that the cerebellum's primary job was only memory. Now they're finding out, oh no, there's a whole lot more complicated than that. That one of the things, motor movements are done by the cerebellum, as well as a lot of memory is done other places. That is much more like the motor movements of the cerebellum actually has to do with the memory of the motor movements. So that we tend to, like a violinist, the way that he fiddles with his hands when he's not playing the violin is different than the way that people fiddle with their fingers that don't have that kind of stuff. I mean, I've seen violinists twiddle, tap their fingers, and they do it very interestingly in the sense of rhythm, and they're actually, anyway. The point is that the cerebellum is also the place where we store not just memories, but also feelings. And that if we can start, because it's associated, I mean, it's just sitting right there on top of the amygdala. The hippocampus is right there. Huh?
Which all animals share, feelings.
That's right. That's in fact very interesting, and is a new concept, because we used to think that they were all dumb animals and we could do anything we wanted to with them because they didn't have any feelings. Now we recognize every animal has feelings. That in fact that's the primary language, that humans are the only ones that have 3 kinds of language. All the others just have 2 kinds of language. What are the 2 kinds of language? Number 1 is the language of feeling. Number 2 is the language of communications with others in your species. And then the 3rd kind of language that only the humans have is the language of being able to see, to be able to connect the dots, to be able to understand. And that's the difference. That's what the frontal cortex is actually able to do. It's actually able to make connections or see things that DOMs just don't do. They can't do the arithmetic that we can do. They cannot do the conceptualizations that we can do because they don't have that kind of brain. And so we actually have 3 different ways of thinking. We have feelings, we have verbalizations, and then we have direct seeing that dogs don't have. That's what makes us...
I agree with that. I think that animals, especially higher animals such as dogs, probably can. It's just to a lesser extent.
Yes, precisely. That's right. It's not a matter of kind. It's a matter of degree. Everything is a matter of degree. You're exactly right.
You know, with take a wolf cub, for example. Yeah. A human can start interacting with a wolf cub from very, very early on. And say, for example, point at something. The wolf cub just look at the owner's hand.
Yeah.
A dog puppy, no. You point at something, the dog puppy will look at what you're pointing at.
Sometimes. Not all the time.
Very often. and they have this ability to engage with human emotion, to empathize, to sense that there's something wrong or something right. A wolf puppy won't do that.
Yeah, right. So again, I think I agree that it's a matter of degrees, and what animals seem to be lacking is that abstraction, right? So they can process information to an extent, but the things that we have, the skills that we have additional to all those animal level processing is the ability to say relate psychology and Dhamma, right? So these are the kind of abstractions that we are privileged to do, but animals would not be able to. They, when it comes to verbalization, I think animals do have the ability to communicate in a verbal way, in a very, particularly for dogs, dolphins, chimpanzees, they have a quite developed verbal capacity, just not the kind that we engage in, right? So
you're right. But in fact, even just my own observation, I can tell about 10 different dog sounds and what they mean. That it's actually, if you study dogs, you can begin to tell the difference between various sounds that they make, whether it's a howl or whether it's a baying or whether it's a whimper or a bark or a cry. And if you think about it, the communications that they're doing is the same way that we communicate too. We communicate in the same way, but somehow or another we've gotten the idea that we're better than dogs, and therefore they don't have good language. And we do. I mean, it's a chauvinism in a way, but dogs are very sophisticated in their language.
Yeah. But what's interesting? Go on.
I was going to say that's another interesting thing that McIlchrist looks at in his book, is the development of language. And there are various theories about how spoken language came about. But he provides a lot of evidence to suggest that actually the original origins were gesture, using your hands, etc. As you will see in animals, the way an animal holds itself, etc., implies a certain state of mind.
Surprisingly enough, a lot of that has to do with culture. The really easy one is the Italians talk with their hands. And so baby Italian children see Italian men talking with their hands, and so they talk with their hands. To where other societies, especially as an example, as an opposite, is the Eskimos. Because of their clothing and other things like that, when they talk, they don't move much. But Italians, they talk and they move their hands a lot.
An interesting experiment I've done, actually. I've noticed, you've got the voice to text facility on a modern phone. And I've noticed for a long time I can't speak fluently to the damn things, and it all comes out wrong. And after reading Milkrist's book, I realized that I'm not able to gesture properly because I'm holding the phone.
Yes.
If I put the phone down and actually start using my hands, all of a sudden it all starts becoming more fluent.
Yes. Yes.
Wow, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing that with me. That's amazing.
And then what he said is then once it moves on from gesture, we then start talking about noise and in fact music. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that a lot of early communication was in fact musical.
Yeah, all music is a gesture. I mean, Danny, look at his drumming. That's just a gesture.
So there's
in Africa where you'll get different tribes that communicate with drums. And they have no idea about each other's drum signs, as it were. What they're listening for is the gesture within the sound.
Exactly.
Someone else's drumming style, but you can understand absolutely what they're saying by the intonation, etc., of the rhythm.
Yeah, this is
Precisely
very
so.
interesting. So there's a cognitive psychologist called Jean Piaget. He suggested that have you heard of him?
Yes.
Yes, so
Yes.
he suggested that our cognitive development is simultaneous to our verbal development, and our thoughts are represented by language. So we think in verbal terms, right? So when a child develops so his memory, basically the development of a child's memory parallels their development of social skills, which means basically they're learning gestures, social cues, and all of that. And that kind of highlights the cultural influence into verbal capacities, intelligence, and all of that, right? Yeah, so you guys can take a look at Jean Piaget's work. He's a cognitive developmental psychologist. I think you like it, like his work. Language is just crazy. Oh yeah, another interesting thing that I was going to mention is that while talking about dogs, right? So they have very clear gestures and body language that they communicate with, right? And that is a simple social transaction, right? Mode of transaction, that they are going to behave in a certain way, and that just is going to mean one particular thing. But when it comes to humans, by the virtue that we are capable of complicating matters, we often read between the lines. And even though somebody is clearly putting up or manifesting a certain gesture or body language, we often interpret it in a different way. Like me interpreting somebody else's body language is going to have my own conditioning, my own flavoring into it. And that can mean that I completely bias or warp the meaning of what somebody else is saying or trying to communicate, isn't it? So that's the beauty of complexity.
Although they do say, don't they, that only about 10% of communication is verbal.
Yes, that's true.
And that's all we are listening to off in the conscious mind, which means not only is the communication done subconsciously going out, it's received subconsciously by the receiver.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that means that so much is happening, we don't even know it.
Yeah. And so there the idea of no judgment, I think, comes into play, that just accept whatever is being delivered to you. Don't go the extra mile of putting or projecting your own conditioning, your own mindset into what's being conveyed to you. Like, I think that to me is, that is how I interpret the idea of no judgment.
Precisely. Actually, what you're now talking about the internal details of paticca samuppada, or the Buddha's method of how the mind works.
Yeah.
In the sense that if we stay in the senses, or if we actually observe the people who we are talking to, that means that the information that we're picking up begins to get more conscious, because we're watching what we're doing rather than assuming. Yes. And that assumption is always based upon our own past. So we're actually, and if we're not paying attention, if we're only half paying attention, that means the other half of what we're getting is stuff we're making up on the spot.
Yes. And that is a clear distinction between assumption and evidence. When we are really aware of somebody who's talking to us, we are relying on evidence, what is being shown to us, rather than if we are trying to assume what this person actually means. That is literally an interpretation which has no evidence and is often, like you said, it's biased, definitely based on our past experience.
That happens so often that we, in fact, have a label for it in our language. It's called a failure to communicate or miscommunication.
Yes.
It's because
Yes.
we're relying upon the fact that we think we already know what they're saying instead of carefully listening to what they're saying.
Uh-huh.
And this is also a good point about the fact that with psychologists, part of the training of a psychologist is to observe their client, to start looking at what's going on rather than making assumptions that we know what they're saying, like ordinary people do. That's one of the things I really like about being around psychologists, is because they're paying attention. They're looking at what's going on. They're paid to do that.
Yes, exactly. We have managed to give
is that if you're looking, there are different forms of evidence. So I might say one thing, but mean another. And that deeper meaning is coming out in my intonation, in my gesture, etc., etc. Or might say something.
Sometimes it comes out in sarcasm. You can hear it. It gets so strong, it's actually could be considered sarcastic.
Yes. But again, all of that, even if somebody has an ulterior motive behind what they are saying, even that is bound to come out in the form of evidence by the virtue of the fact that they are really expressing it. Right?
Look at how much evidence there now is on YouTube that comes in the forms of, and this comes from many places. It comes from CIA agents, it comes from cops, it comes from investigators, and it comes from psychologists, in the sense that now there's a whole art of telling when someone is lying. And there's many different conversations about that. Or can you see somebody on film and tell whether they're lying or not? Like a politician, and you're looking at a speech, are they lying? Which is a different art than you being a police officer interrogating a suspect and trying to determine whether they're lying or not, because in that situation, you've got a lot of extra tools. When you're just looking at a video, all you have is the power of observation. Go ahead.
There's I can't remember the individual's name, but he has made a science out of studying what he calls micro gestures.
Oh, wow.
I've heard of the term, yes.
Very, very small facial tics, etc., etc. And he has learned to observe, or she has learned to observe these minutely. And he or she says, I can tell basically 100% of the time whether someone's lying or not.
Right, exactly. Now, here's something about that, and that is that if you have them on film, you can slow it down, and you can actually show the whole classroom of people these micro gestures in slow motion. But the real skill is when you can pick up those micro gestures in real time. That's when you become a really excellent psychologist. When you can tell somebody's lying just by looking at them, just by watching them, just by hearing them talk. You don't need the sophistication of the interrogation officers who have tricks and ways of putting two and two together and whatnot.
This individual I'm talking about, he or she says, I can teach you very, very quickly how to do this. But she says, or he says, the one thing is do you really want to know all the time what someone is really thinking?
Yes, that's a decision to make.
Well, it depends upon the observer and whether or not he can do some observing correctly, or whether he's going to take those observations and add his own crap to it, which is the whole art. Okay, the art of actually looking at what's going on so that you don't add your own stuff to it.
Yes, also whether he or she can detach the emotional content that may arise from knowing whether somebody is lying or not, right?
Precisely.
Right. Now, there's a lot of characteristics, especially when someone is in public a lot and there's a lot of videos so that they repeat things over and over again. You can begin to see cues. An example of that is the guy telling a direct lie, and then he'll look over to the side to see if he's getting approval.
Yes.
Or another one is what in TA they call the please me driver, which has to do with looking directly, raising your eyebrows, nodding your head, and trying to get agreement. When they do that, that's almost a guarantee that position is that they have just lied to you just a second ago, and now they want to prove to themselves that you bought their crap.
Yes. You can also tell who's in charge in a group when you pose, say, a question or something. Automatically, people who are unconsciously in a submissive state is going to look up to the person who they think is in charge. So that is a way of knowing how authority roles play in a team.
Yes, watch the eye movements of the people in a group, and you'll find out the group dynamics just by watching who they're looking at and who they're getting permission and approvals from and that kind of stuff. It's very interesting. That, in fact, they have done quite a lot of research on that with double-blind studies by having basically people come in and being given different scenarios, like you're all here to be in a job opportunity, and they're all applying for the same job, but each one of them is given tiny little differences for them to deal with each other on. But all they're really interested is taking the videos so that they can study who's the dominant player here, in the sense of can they actually decide who's going to get the job just by watching the applicants in the waiting room.
Amazing.
They can do it's amazing like that. You can actually use that kind of research to see that, you can actually tell who's going to get the job just by looking at the applicants in the waiting room before any of them has an interview.
And body language.
They're sussing each other out, and all kinds of stuff is going on. And someone will come up and become dominant, and sometimes aggressively so.
Yes, for sure. But then again, if somebody is trying to assert dominance aggressively, that is often not the ideal leadership skill.
Oh, he's not going to get the job. Nobody would give him the job. But he doesn't know that. He doesn't know that he can, he thinks that he can bully other people and intimidate them. So when they go into the interview, they think he's going to win and they're a loser already. But if somebody's observing his behavior out there who actually works for the company, they may not even bother to interview this dude because they're not going to give him the job. So anyway, that's it's very interesting. This has been a wonderful conversation, but it's actually gotten kind of late here. And I really appreciate it, especially, Robert, when you came in later. I really like that you brought in your stuff about brain divisions and left and right. There's still that's actually a more traditional view of the left and right brain, and they're getting much more of a holistic kind of view of it now, because that left-right brain was based upon the research done with broken brains years ago, rather than now doing MRI studies with holistic functioning brains.
Hypothesis is very, very sophisticated. It's a 500-page long book. I will send you a link to a talk of his.
I would really like that. Thank you.
It's not simplistic at all. It's not simply left and right brain at all. He looks at it from the point of view of neurophysiology, neuropsychology, language, philosophy, physiology, right across the board. It's an incredible book.
Right.
In a way, what you're saying is verifying my position is that humanity is on a positive trajectory. We're going to figure out what it's like to be human, so that we can all begin to be human.
Yes.
This is bright times ahead.
As long as we can stop the politicians and the businesses hijacking the human condition.
Oh no, you have to understand that they're irrelevant.
No, I don't think they are irrelevant.
They're irrelevant to how you feel right now.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. But the point is that the masses are hijacked.
Well, they will figure it out one at a time that all of that business is irrelevant, and they'll stop living by that way and live happily instead. One at a time. One Dhamma dude at a time.
So it has to be a process rather than a goal, right? So we have to. I said we have to aim towards maintaining a process of enlightening one person at a time, rather than trying to achieve a whole society full of enlightened beings.
That's the ultimate aim, though, but one at a time.
I don't have an ultimate aim. I don't need an ultimate aim. In fact, I could go so far as to say that I used to have an ultimate goal or an ultimate aim, and that was to stop having ultimate aims and ultimate goals. And since I've reached that ultimate gain or ultimate goal, now I don't have any ultimate, I'm just here having fun. No place to go and nothing to do, and the spring comes and I'm just having fun.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I don't think that's quite true, because I would say that you're trying to share your discovery. You're spreading it.
But I'm having fun doing it. That's the whole point.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, it would be hypocrisy.
Exactly. Precisely. Which is what normal civilization is. It's a hypocritical. And the reason it's hypocritical is because our goals or ideals are not matchable. We're trying to do the impossible. And we always fail and we always feel miserable. But we keep pucking up and saying, oh, but we can do. And then we fail again. The answer is, we're a bunch of screw-ups. Let's enjoy screwing up. Let's have fun at it.
Yes, absolutely. This was so much fun, guys. We should do this again sometime.
Well, we're going to do it every Sunday, so you can call in. We're going to, this is going to be the Sangha UK. We're going to do it at 10 a.m. UK time, which is 4 p.m. in the afternoon here. And we've got plenty of people in the UK that can call in. Thank you so much, Robert, for showing up. I hope you show up again next week.
Thank you, Robert.
Debbie, you'll have to come for lunch sometime or something.
Oh, I'd love to. Yes, as soon as I develop immunity from this COVID vaccine, which is like in 2 weeks, I'm free to travel. And then whenever you're free, me and Danny are going to pop over and we're going to have a lovely chat. Yeah.
Good.
I would like that. Yes, we got Sangha growing here. We got a convoy. Yeah.
I should be able to do that, shouldn't I?
Sorry?
I should be able to message you through Skype, because I'll have your contact.
You got now that you've got you guys can communicate directly with each other by communicating with the Sangha UK. You type in and she can read it.
Brilliant.
So this is now it's an open forum. That's what I like about this group thing with Skype is that it's an open forum that stays open all the time, and we can communicate with each other this way.
Amazing. Great.
Where Zoom is much more closed, you got to already know when to call the Zoom. But here we've got a contact list and open.
Yeah, there's more flexibility, which we all love. So, yeah.
Okay.
So anything, Robert. Thank you so much. And Debbie, wherever Olivia went, tell her bye-bye.
Just got tired.
Okay, guys.
See you. Bye.
Okay. Thank you so much, guys. See you. Bye-bye.